Many of you just came from the panel where he was speaking just a couple hours ago. Of course, his book is a tour de force, I think, in terms of really getting to the complexities of Israeli society and history and politics through personal biographies and stories. It's extremely well written, unlike many of our academic books, speaking of myself. So you can see the excellent writing style as well as engaging, thoughtful book that he wrote. And it's excellent, I think, because in some ways he looks at the uniqueness of Israel as a society living on the edge that on one hand is the only country in the world that perhaps from the beginning until today faces so many security threats and even threats of extinction at some points. But on the other hand has really in the midst of that, triumphed in terms of its democracy and economy and society and trying to live a normal life in the midst of this. But he looks at the complexities, at the costs, as well as the triumphs. And in some ways, again, it's a very unique story about Israel, but as I said at the panel earlier, what strikes me too is at least part of the title, I think, could be a subtitle for any country in the world, including the United States, the triumphs and tragedy of the United States. And when we think of how that book might be written in terms of the qualities that haven't been quite reached, in terms of skeletons in the closet in the past, in terms of, on the other hand, being a prosperous democracy. And in that sense, even though I think Ari Shavit speaks very eloquently about the uniqueness of Israel, it's also a testament in talking about the complexity of Israel to comparing it to any other country in the world in terms of both the triumphs and tragedies that exist, I think, in every country. And so not only did he write a book that many of you read, and some of you that didn't, I think will quickly go and try to read, but in person and orally, who we witnessed today, that he's also a tour de force. He had a really in-depth personal discussion with many students at Hillel over lunch, and then had a very intellectually engaging and eloquent and thoughtful discussion with a panel of mostly students, but also fellow faculty and community members this afternoon. So I'm really eager to hear kind of the third part of the day evolve. I think that you won't be disappointed in hearing his engaging, thoughtful comments about Israel society. He this morning was writing an op-ed about the evolving events with Hezbollah in Israel and trying to warn against, even though both parties are not interested in going to war, trying to warn against kind of tragic wars that can unfold unintentionally. And so I find the book in many ways prophetic. I think his op-ed was that as well. And I think we'll be captivated during his talk, and I think he welcomes questions and discussions afterwards. So thank you for coming, and we're honored to have you, Ari Shavit.
Well, thank you so much for your great introduction, and thank you all for being here. The new faces that I don't know, and the many old friends that I have, that we have already a several hour-long deep relationship, and I mean it. I feel I have many friends here already after a very intensive day. As Yael said, this is, I'm an intensive guy. Sometimes I have a feeling that I live for like 5-6 people. But this was like an extraordinary intensive day. So yeah, I told you part of the story, but it's the story that the day began after midnight with the first op-ed I wrote for a few hours, which was, I can tell you the secret, perhaps it'll be published a week or two from today, which is actually claiming that the question in these Israeli election is who is truly a Zionist. And is it true that the right wing are Zionists as they claim, or is it actually that it's the other way around? So I was so pleased with my article. I went to sleep at 3 a.m. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. and I realized the article was not relevant for this week. And because again, as you have said, as you probably realize, that if you do not, I'll try to explain, we are really in a critical moment. I'm somewhat more hopeful this evening. This morning I was deeply concerned because Israel attacked Hezbollah 10 days ago. Hezbollah retaliated this morning. And this is exactly the kind of scenario that leads to unplanned wars. And we had exactly this scenario in 2006, and it led to the terrible Second Lebanon War. So I felt an obligation, professional obligation, but also a civic obligation, to use what influence I had to try to help in preventing. So I missed class this morning because I rapidly wrote another op-ed. And the headline of that one is asking my prime minister and my defense minister to put the genie back in the bottle after they took it out of the bottle 10 days ago. So we'll see what the morning has. I mean, again, no one knows. It seems right now a bit less alarming than it seemed just a few hours ago. Within all this, I had the deep pleasure. It's much more than pleasure. But I had a wonderful conversation at noon with a group of young people, many of which are here. And I was so moved and I was enriched by learning about their experiences as being mostly young Jews who care about Israel and care about Jewish identity, but are struggling with it in different ways. Each one, not many people in the room, but there are so many different versions of the same story, the same challenge. And then the way that non-Jews that care about Israel, the dilemmas they have. So I learned so much, and I really felt, I believe, I'm a humanist. I believe actually sincerely in dialogue, not just as a slogan. But today was a great example that in a relatively short time, in unfavorable circumstances, you can actually talk, you can listen, you can speak, you can learn, you can engage. So through this wonderful young group of young people, I already feel that I belong here. And then we had this wonderful session in the afternoon that Yael arranged, and she inspired me, and I think she inspired the group. So it was a very long day, very intensive. I'm already grateful to all of you for being here, and I already feel that I take with me a very significant day. So my one concern now is actually that some of you will have an Ari Shavit overdose. So I'll try to keep it short. Won't be easy because there's so much to talk about. So a lot of it we discussed, either noon in the afternoon, but I'll try to do the impossible within a reasonable half hour or whatever, to try to talk a bit about my book, a bit about my country, my nation, and a bit about the challenges that I think we face in this dramatic juncture. I'm not speaking only about tonight, but this year and after being going through a very meaningful year. And I'll try to remember what I said in the afternoon, so I won't repeat myself too much. But what's really important for me would be the second half, which is the conversation. Because I'm really here because I believe in the importance of conversation, candid, hopefully intelligent, really open discussion about Israel, about Jewish life, about America, the Middle East. My feeling is that we don't have enough of that conversation. So I'm really looking forward to hear you and to respond to whatever questions and to be engaged in a meaningful conversation. So let me begin with the book, because I think it's a good way to discuss Israel. So when I went on this journey of writing My Promised Land, when I decided to do it, and when I had the opportunity to do it, many of my friends asked me, warned me not to do it. Their claim was that there are so many books about Israel out there, and there's such deep Israel fatigue that no one would read another Israel book. And yet, I was determined to write it. And there were basically two reasons for it. The first one was a totally personal, almost egocentric book. I literally, since I remember myself, from the age of 5 or 6, I remember this notion that I was born in a unique country, to a unique nation, and to a unique historical pattern. And I relate later to the comparisons with other nations that have their own uniqueness. So I had a real need for myself, an existential need in the French sense, not the Iranian sense, to decipher this thing. I'm a journalist. I have pretty good access. You know, ministers and generals call me even when I'm in Michigan. I generally know what's going on. But I had the feeling that even I don't get it. Even I don't get it. So I needed the book, not in order to do some more polemics or to promote some agenda, but in order to try to understand for myself what my nation, my bizarre nation, is all about. And in this sense, my book is a bit like the book of a villager who climbs up the mountain and looks at his own village, asking himself, what is the village all about? When and why was it founded? Where is it located? And what does the future hold? And like that villager, the book is a kind of journey of a person who so much belongs. I'm as Israeli as any other. I so belong. But on the other hand, in the book I look at my own village from the outside as well. So it has this kind of tension of being from within and from without at the same time. But there was another reason for it. And that I realized as I began doing it. Because, in my mind, Israel that has so many problems, one of our deepest problems is that we Israelis lost our narrative. And any nation needs a narrative. Definitely immigrant nations, immigrant societies, and somewhat artificial nations, like America, like Israel. But Israel, that is so small and fragile, definitely need a narrative. And we happen to be Jews. We come from the book. This is what kept us. The texts are our oxygen. And when Zionism came along, we had a narrative before we had anything else. When there was no state, no army, no economy, we had a narrative. We have a sense of meaning, where we come from and where we want to go. And sadly, over the years, the narrative that was so essential, disintegrated. We grew richer, stronger, economically, politically, but the narrative, the sense of meaning, disintegrated. In my mind, this happened because of two reasons. One was the 7th day of the 6-Day War. The great debate over the territories, occupation, peace, greater Israel, great peace. A debate that we should have, a debate that I'm engaged in. The debate created a crack in the narrative that united us and held us together. Up to 67, we were the just and the besieged. And from the 7th day of the 6-Day War, that changed. And it got worse every year, and it's getting worse every year, almost every quarter. But then there is another, and that is, many people talk about the problem of Israeli extremism. And I oppose Israeli extremism, and it is a problem. But the other problem we have in Israel is cynicism. Following the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War, we totally changed. Up until that war, we were too arrogant, too self-confident, too in love with ourselves. We were the heroic Sabras, the blonde hair, suntan, handsome, strong, perfect. And after 73, when we got a blow, we developed a kind of civic culture that is so critical, judgmental, bitter. And in this sense, the cynicism is, in my mind, the greatest problem of the Israeli psyche. As you'll hear later, I love Israelis, and I love Israel. But the cynicism is so troubling, because it doesn't allow even us to see the wonder of Israel, to see the greatness of Israel. We are so consumed by this unhealthy attitude. So what I try to do is, first of all, to ask myself what I think are the real Israel questions, the deep ones. Why Israel? What's Israel? And real Israel. But I try to answer them not by bringing a theory or an argument, thesis. I try to answer them by telling the tale. And what I try to do in telling the tale is to bring back the human element. So many people treat us Israelis as if we are either angels or demons. We are no angels. We are definitely not demons. We are humans. But we happen to be rather remarkable humans with an extraordinary human story. So I wanted people who would read the book to have that sense. Not only the insights, but the feelings that will allow them to realize what an incredible human endeavor Israel is. Obviously, as this was a personal, I had to begin with my own beginning. And my own beginning, for those of you who have not read the book, is in London of the 1890s. My great-grandfather was an unusual Jew. In the late 19th century, only a minority of Jews were privileged. It wasn't like today's America, when you assume that any Jew is successful unless proven otherwise. That was not the case then. Most Jews were poor, persecuted, lived in disgrace. But he was lucky. His parents immigrated to London. He succeeded very quickly. He was born there. He was given a chance. He was a self-made man. In a very short time, he became a real Victorian gentleman. He had it all. A fine house, a beautiful artistic wife, 9 children, later 2 more. Each child born was a very musical family. Each child born got a musical instrument, a piano, a cello, or a violin. Life was perfect. They had money, they had dignity, they had culture. So why leave all that? My great-grandfather was, in every respect, except for the fact that he was Jewish, he was a Victorian gentleman. He loved the Queen, he loved the Empire, he loved the theater, and he loved Shakespeare. Why would such a Victorian gentleman leave London behind, capital of the world, and travel to the remote, desolate province Palestine was? Chaim Weizmann used to say that you don't have to be crazy to be a Zionist, but it helps. And my great-grandfather's journey seems to be crazy. But it was not. It was not. And this is what makes this story important and relevant to this day. Because what I realized when I looked at into his story is that the early Zionists, of which he was a junior player, he was not a major leader, but he was within Herzl's circle. Early Zionists had 2 tragic insights. Both of them genius. One was that they realized that Europe was becoming a death trap to its Jews. Now it's so important to understand this and to remember this today. When so many people claim that Zionism is colonialism, that we were created by the empires, that we were the ancient agents of imperialism. So it's important to remember that the Jewish people, the Jews, were Europe's ultimate other for 1,500 years. We were treated like dirt. But what the early Zionists realized, that we were about to become Europe's ultimate victim. They didn't know there would be a Holocaust. They didn't know there would be Auschwitz and Treblinka. But they realized that there was no future for us in Europe. They imagined some sort of mega pogrom or a series of pogroms. They saw the terrible hate, especially in Eastern Europe. So faced with the most radical challenge a people can be faced with, the challenge of extinction, they came up with the most radical solution possible. And in order to save our lives, they transferred us from one continent to another and took a land and built a nation and revived the language. In this sense, those people who claim that we are colonialists, Zionism was an amazing endeavor, project of life-saving. Because what these people did is to use European power, political power, economic power, scientific power, in order to create a European-like safe haven outside of Europe that will save the Jews from the wrath and rage and lunacy of Europe. And their one sin was that they came too late. Because if the project had begun 20 years earlier, millions and millions and millions would have been saved. But the early Zionists had another insight too, which is much more relevant in Michigan, much more relevant. Because they realized that the old formula that guaranteed Jewish existence in the diaspora for thousands of years will not work anymore. The old formula was based on what I call the two great G's: the intimate relationship with God and the defense of the walls of the ghetto. The intimate relationship with God was changing, and the walls of the ghetto were collapsing. So they realized that once the pogroms will be gone, there will be no Cossacks, there will not be brutal, violent anti-Semitism. Will be challenged by something completely different. Because in the countries that accept us and give us freedom and prosperity, will be endangered in a completely different way. So while ultra-Orthodox Jews do not have a problem, because they can live in their ghettos in Brooklyn or Manchester or Antwerp or Naples in 100 years' time and 1,000 years' time, we, non-ultra-Orthodox Jews, are challenged to guarantee the Jewish people, Jewish civilization, Jewish values, Jewish identity. We need an Israel. We need a place that is a powerhouse of a modern, relevant, democratic Jewish identity. That does not mean people have to go to Israel. The old Zionists used to say that. I don't believe in it at all. Anyone who wants to come is welcome. But I think Zionism of today is actually to help maintain Jewish life in Jewish communities here and elsewhere in the diaspora. And one, again in brackets now, one of the reasons I'm so angry with the Israeli government, Israeli politics, the ultra-Orthodox, the settlers, is they betray this mission by making Israel unattractive to young Jews in the diaspora. They are betraying Israel's most important mission. But we'll get into that later on. These two insights are what made Zionism, in my mind, just, needed, and remarkable. And in this sense, already in 1897, April, Erev Pesach, when my great-grandfather arrived, the seeds of the triumph are there. Because Israel is a triumph of the human spirit. You don't have to be Jewish or Israeli to see that. But I was determined not to write a propaganda book. I was determined to deal with the reality as I see it, but as I see that it is. So I had to deal with the fact that when my great-grandfather arrived in the port of Jaffa, there was something he would not see. He would not see that the city of Jaffa was predominantly an Arab city, with a great Hebrew past, but an Arab city. And when he traveled through the land in his Thomas Cook carriages, he did not see the dozens and dozens of Palestinian villages on the road from Jaffa to Jerusalem, and on the road from Jerusalem to the Lake of Galilee. Again, we need context. There was no Palestinian Republic there. There was no Palestinian kingdom. There wasn't even a Palestinian people that already defined itself as a people. That happened decades later, partly because of the clash with the Zionists. So we were not conquistadors. And as I said earlier in one of the sessions, if Australia is legitimate, Israel is definitely legitimate. We went back to our ancient homeland, and as I just said, we had an existential need to go. We did not just go to some remote continent to get the gold. But we have to address the fact that there was a flaw. There was a tragic flaw from the beginning. No one meant bad. There was no evil here. All these conspiracies of some kind of vicious intentions, it's ridiculous. But there was a tragic flaw. Because my great-grandfather would not see the fact that there are 500,000 Arabs in the land. And so did the other founding fathers and mothers of Zion. So while you had the seeds of the triumph, you also have the seeds of the tragedy. Because the conflict did not begin the moment Benjamin Netanyahu walked into his office. The conflict began right there. It was built into the ground. It was an integral part of this amazing group. And this is why Israel is so fascinating, so exciting, and in some ways troubling. Because it's these two forces that are wrestling with each other for over 100 years. The heroism, the greatness, the idealism, the morality, and then the flaw, the conflict, the wars, the tragedy. So this is what my book is about. I will not trouble you with all the twists of turns of the plots. Those of you who have not read the book, I hope you will have a chance to read. There's one chapter that I want to talk about. People ask me, what have I learned in this long journey? It took me 5, 6 years to write it. The one thing that I've learned that I really didn't know about was how remarkable was Israel of the 1950s. Many people know about our heroic pioneers and our heroic warriors. And they were heroic. But other nations, like yours, had pioneers too and warriors. What's truly remarkable about Israel is the civilian heroism of the 1950s. Imagine America, God forbid, going through a war in which it loses 3.5 million people. Think of it, especially the younger people who did not experience what some of the older people are experiencing. Think of America today losing 3.5 million people in a year. God forbid. And then think of America absorbing 500 million immigrants in the following 3.5 years. Is it humanly possible? Can it be done? And then you have some issue with 12 million immigrants. Israel of the 1950s did that. Now I'm telling you, I'm not religious. There's not a mystic bone in me. But when you see these fundamental facts, you shiver. How did they do this? How was this done? We were young, we were poor, we were hated, we were isolated. We did not have a friend in the world, except for American Jewry. We did not have a friend in the world. We just came out of this terrible war. And we did it. But it's not only the numbers that are so astounding. Who are the people that went there? So many of them were refugees from the Arab world who lost everything overnight. There's so much talk about Palestinian refugees, and there should be talk. But there are nearly 1 million Jews who became refugees overnight in Iraq, in Egypt, in North Africa, in Yemen, and elsewhere. They lost everything. And so many were Holocaust survivors. People with nightmares at night. People with numbers tattooed into their arms. People who just lost their first family 4 or 5 years earlier and had to begin a new family, sometimes not telling their new children about the old children they had just 5 or 6 years ago. These people, the ultimate victims, who came from the ultimate hell, they did not despair. Their revenge was not suicide bombing. Their revenge was to live. And they sent their new kids to the best schools. And they created a health system that is better than the American one. And they built housing, cheap housing, lousy housing, but housing. They built a nation against all odds. So when you look at Israel of the 1950s, you really understand what a great triumph of the human spirit Israel is. Sadly, over the years, we've lost our way politically. We don't have the same kind of political genius that we have. We don't have the same kind of discipline, the ingenuity, the social ingenuity that we had at it. And yet I do believe that in Israelis you still have to this day a lot of that spirit. This is why I love so much Israelis and Israeli society, while I'm so critical of our governments and our political system. I end the book by traveling in the footsteps of my great-grandfather. I went to all the places he went, and a few others. And I asked myself, what have we achieved and what have we not? Where have we succeeded and where have we failed? And basically I come up with two answers, or two pillars of Israel's existence. On the one hand, we are the most intimidated democracy on the face of the earth. This is because there is a deep tension between the Jewish democratic state and a lot of the Islamic forces surrounding us. There are only 6.2 million Jews there. There are over 1 billion Muslims around. Thank God many of them are friendly. We don't have an issue with all of them. But there are strong Islamic forces, as we all know now, that have an issue with the Jewish state. And there is a tension between Israel and large parts of the Arab world. Again, thank God, many of the Arabs are our friends. One should not generalize, it's not an overall problem. But as we know today, the Middle East is so cruel to its minorities. The Middle East is so lax tolerance. And we are a minority in the Middle East. Today, someone asked me about Edward Said. When I had this great interview with Said 14 years ago, 15 years ago, 14 and a half years ago, he was making all these claims against Zionism, the Jews. And then at the end, he said, but you know, Ari, at the end of the day, I fear for you. Because you are a minority in the Middle East. And the Middle East is unkind to its minorities. So that's the second tension. But then there is the tension, deepest of them all, of the conflict with the Palestinians. And I'm an anti-occupation person. I've always thought that settlements are a horrible idea. The first text that I've written that went into print was a Peace Now, Peace Movement leaflet warning how dangerous settlements are. I wrote it when I was your age. And when I read it today, I'm so proud and so sad. Because the writing was of the war. This was such a flawed project from the beginning. But the conflict is not only about occupation and about settlements. It's a deep existential conflict that began in 1897. It won't go away easily. So because of these three sources of tension, Israel is endangered like no other OECD country is endangered. Probably like very few countries in the world. We seem strong. Well, we are not as strong as we seem. And the power that we do have, as I said to some people this morning, is the power of an underdog who takes steroids. We are an underdog on steroids. But when you look at the fundamentals, at the numbers, at the location, at the territory, we are an endangered nation. So the Israeli condition is a unique condition because, while you have many problems in America, no one in this room has doubt whether America will be here in 50 years' time. Might be more red or more blue. But America will be here. Israelis never know. We don't talk about it. It's a taboo. But the unique Israeli condition has to do with this deep uncertainty. But if this is the manifestation of the tragedy, the triumph is what we do with this. Because while, as you said, we live on the edge, we live with a vengeance. We live dangerously, but we live in such a spectacular way. So while Zionism failed in creating the utopia it set out to create, the kibbutz dream is shattered. There are a few wonderful kibbutzim, but it won't change the nation. It won't bring salvation to humankind. There will not be a social justice paradise. But what Zionism did manage to do is to establish this remarkable, robust, free society. And we Israelis, with all our faults, we are impossible in so many ways. We are rough, and we are late, and we are neurotic. We are Jewish, many of us. But we are innovative, and we are creative, and we are sensual, and we are sexy. We make more babies than any other OECD country. So what you have in Israel is such an intensity of life. Everybody heard about the Israeli high-tech boom, which is remarkable. But it's only one of the manifestations of this vibrance. You feel it wherever you go in Israel. In the arts, in dance, in cinema, in music, in commerce, in technology. We are so intense, because we are too intense. So what you have in Israel, in this sense, is such a remarkable phenomenon. Because while, in a sense, we came from death, we saved ourselves from death, and we are threatened by death, we've chosen life. And Israel is such an inspiring celebration of life. So, why Israel? Because there is a need. There is a moral imperative to have a home for the homeless people. And what's Israel? It's vitality against all odds. And will Israel? That depends on us Israelis changing our ways. And taking this great energy and talent that you have in Israeli life and channeling back to Israeli politics. So we will deal as a nation with the challenges facing us in a completely different way than what we do today. Thank you very much. Yes, please.
You talked about...
Please, if you can raise your voice.
You talked about how Israel has had a narrative in the beginning, but lost its narrative. And I'm wondering, the book is in English and it has been read primarily, if I'm not mistaken, by an American audience. Will it be published in Hebrew, and is there a response in Israel? And what are your, I guess the question behind it is, you're trying to refine the narrative, but is it a narrative that Israelis, is it a narrative for Americans, Israelis, both? How is that being seen?
So it's a deep question with a shallow answer. First of all, yeah, the book was, first of all, it wasn't published only in English, it was, I think, already published in 10, 12 other languages. The reason it was not published in Hebrew to this day, I hope it will be published in Hebrew later this year, is a very technical, banal reason. I was commissioned to write a book by Random House. Random House had this weakness, they like the books in English. But when the moment I began writing it, it was clear to me that I had to write it in Hebrew as well. So I'll be true to myself. So I actually wrote it simultaneously in both languages, which was hardly. What happened is that the editing I did only on the English, because I was working with my great, great editor. Cindy Spiegel was the best editor in America. If you need an editor, go to her. And she's a wonderful person as well. And the idea was that I'll come, the book will be published here, I'll have a month-long book tour, I'll go back to Israel, and I'll take 3, 4 quiet months to do the editing of the Hebrew. With everything that happened in this country, I didn't have 3 or 4 quiet days since. And I don't know if you don't know it, America is a vast country. It is wonderful, but it's a bit cruel as well. So you don't say to America, wait for me, I'll come in a year's time. So I found myself engaged with people, with travelers, not only in America, in Europe, Britain, in Australia. I hope that soon I will have the calm time, perhaps after the Israeli election, and finish the editing of the Hebrew. And then we'll see what happens in Israel. But the book will definitely be published in Hebrew. By now, of course, I will also add a chapter to the next edition that will come up in English, dealing with the last year or two. Because so much has happened in 2014 and it's still happening in 2015. And without intention, the book is structured in what proved now to be a very smart way. I didn't plan it, that you could actually add a chapter, in 2025, I can add a chapter 2 if I'll be around. So definitely in this sense, the Hebrew edition will be more up to date because it has more in it. But don't worry. There is no chance that the book will not come out in Hebrew. Yes, please.
You ended your comments this afternoon with a prediction that peace will come to this region only when Israeli moderates achieve political power and can deal with Arab moderates.
We should achieve power too.
I'd like your candid assessment as to when and where Arab moderates will come to political power.
So it depends. The question was about Israeli moderates and Arab moderates. I try to combine my ideals or even my idealism with realism. That's the story of my life. I deal all the time with a tension between my values that I think are liberal democratic values and the brutal reality that I'm surrounded. And I'm trying not to lose either one. I mean, I wish reality would not be brutal, but I think it's a moral duty and political duty not to just have great intentions, but to deal with reality as it is. So, the answer to your question is that I don't see an Israeli-like peace movement in the Arab side in the coming years. I think that the dynamics, first of all, the Palestinians, with their suffering and with their problems, with the flaws of their political culture, and with the understandable tragedy and agony and occupation and everything. I don't see them producing a kind of very benign, generous, totally liberal movement by the end of the year. And the sad fact that I was talking about today several times is when you look throughout the region, you get almost desperate because you don't see the attempts. Look, America tried 2 major projects in the Middle East in the last 20 years. You tried to bring a Scandinavian-like peace to the Middle East, and you tried to impose a Jeffersonian democracy. Both failed. The Middle East rejects it. It's not there. We were naive in the 1990s when my own beloved ex-president, Mr. Peres, was talking of the new Middle East. We thought that, in 2 years, the Middle East will resemble 21st century Europe. Some forces in the Middle East resemble 11th century Europe. So we were naive. And then we were naive, the Bush administration and the neocons were naive about how you can transform Iraq. They didn't get it. They didn't understand how the physics. And then we were also naive, once again, just 4 years ago, exactly 4 years ago, when we thought that the Google kids would run Egypt. Who didn't? My most distinguished friends and colleagues compared the Arab Spring to the American Revolution, to the French Revolution. The ones who were very cautious compared to perestroika. Where are we 4 years later? Only in Tunisia there's hope. So you have to look, it's time to look at the Middle East as the Middle East. The Middle East will not transform over a day. And I don't want to get into any specific name, but I had amazing conversations today here and in some other campuses, some of the most fascinating conversations with Arab students. That when I talk about this, some of the liberal Americans, the liberal Israelis have issue, but the Arabs come to me and say how right you are. Because reasonable and good-willing Arabs understand the problem. The Middle East will not, is different. Sadly, it's different. Now, eventually, it won't be different. It will change. But it has to go through a long, deep process that Europe went through for hundreds of years. I hope it'll be much quicker, but it'll take time. You need secularization. You need. You don't send the Marines to create a McDonald's democracy overnight. You don't do it. So, and yet, after sharing your concern, I'll tell you where I see hope. I think that if you work, that having said all that I've said now, doesn't mean that there is no option of peace. If it's the right kind of peace. You will not have a Scandinavian-like peace. It won't be Holland. It won't be the Benelux country. Syria is no Canada, and Gaza is no Vermont. But you can work with what's there because there are many people who don't want war. There are many people who want a life. So if you work in a reasonable way, not imposing utopian ideas, I think you can create a serious coalition of the moderates in the Middle East. And within this terrible chaos and human catastrophe we see there is opportunity as well. Because so many moderate Arabs are now so scared of Iran, so scared of ISIS, so scared of Islamic extremism, that they look at Israel and they say, we don't like these Jews. But they are a pretty reliable neighbor compared to all the other things that are going on. So there is a great potential, in my mind, of creating an American, Arab, Israeli, Palestinian alliance of the moderates, as long as you're reasonable. Again, don't expect a perfect peace, but work with the interests, work with the people who want a life, and try to give as much stability to the region as possible. It won't be perfect, and the instability in the Middle East will remain with us for a long time. And it will be tyrannies, it will be monarchies, it won't be your system, and not even our system. But that does not mean that you give up on hope. I think work can be done to create a regional, moderating, stabilizing structure within which we should have a reasonable and realistic Israeli-Palestinian process that gradually, immediately launches two-state dynamics, gradually establishes a two-state state, and eventually, long-term, creates a two-state solution. Yes, miss.
You mentioned before the conversation you had with some students.
Can you raise your voice?
Yeah, I'll just my voice as well. You mentioned before the conversation you had with some students this afternoon, this lunch actually, and I was wondering if, because you did talk about more about how the younger generation perceive Israel and how they should like talk to Israel. So I want to know what will be your one top advice to the younger generation, Jewish and non-Jewish, when they're approaching to talk about Israel, when they're approaching to get knowledge for Israel, especially on campuses across America.
My message for the young people?
Yeah.
So let's listen to several young people, and because I like to hear the young people first, and then I'll respond. I don't like to preach to young people. Yes, please. But I'll answer your question.
I had a question, but I guess it ties into that about the cynicism. And my thing on that was kind of what came first: the cynicism developed the politics we have today, or the politics create the cynicism we have? Because you're right, there is a main cynicism. I tend to feel this too. You really don't like Netanyahu or the Likud party. That's being very generous.
I didn't hear what you said, Benjamin?
I do not like Netanyahu or the Likud party at all, and that's being very generous when I say that. So, and I know people would share that opinion with me. So, I mean, kind of where does the cynicism start? And should I feel justified in feeling cynical, or in other words, like, should I expect Israel to change first before I change my opinion of that cynicism?
Great question, and then it has to do with what was asked. So first of all, about the cynicism, but then we'll get into the really important issue. I think, look, we tried in Israel several times, to change. People say that the problem is the system, and our political system, the election system, is really flawed and problematic. But I really think that we have a serious political culture problem. It's not just the technical change of the system. And I'll give you my take. It's not a total explanation. I'll try to do it brief. I think that what happened in following 73 and then the rise of the Likud in 77, that the old Israeli elites, what I call the Israeli wasps, the white Ashkenazi supporters of peace, have developed, have acted as the most primitive political tribe. And we adopted a kind of protest culture that resembles the 60s and the 70s. And that was the outcome. Like, we rebelled, we protested, we were critical and cynical. We never went through the phase of growing up and really transforming this into a serious vision for the country that offers the country, as I said in the afternoon, one, a realistic peace concept, two, a sense that we care about all Israelis, we love them and we worry about them and we take care of them, and we lost what I call like a kind of serving elite, people who are committed to all the people and are trying to deal with the general good. So the result was that there was a kind of vacuum in Israeli politics, because the right wing came in all the time actually feeling that these lefties don't let us rule. If we just didn't have these lefty traitors, no, we could have done wonders. And what the people on the left say, though, if we only didn't have, we live a kind of negative political life. I oppose people you oppose. But it's not the way to do politics to live in a negative way. You need a positive ethos. You cannot be just negative. And in this sense, we did not go through the process that, say, the Democratic Party went here first with Bill Clinton and then with Barack Obama. We didn't go. We did. And the one real wondrous period we had was with Yitzhak Rabin, who made his own mistakes as well, as sanctified as he is, because for good reason. But he created the change. First of all, you saw that when you talked about peace in the right kind of context, you won the elections. And he did create change, and it ended with a terrible tragedy. But actually, since then, we never had the leader who will create the change. And it's not only the specific leader. We didn't have the group, the party, the agenda, the plan, the platform. So I think that Netanyahu is, you see it now with the election campaign, is so weak and strong. I mean, he's there because there is no alternative. He's not a loved leader, even among his own people. And the weaknesses there are so apparent. The reason he's there, and I don't know what will happen after March 17th, is that we didn't produce a serious alternative. So I think that if we will do that, we can change the dynamics. Because as I said this afternoon, Israel is fixable. It can be changed. But it's up for the liberals and the peaceniks to act as leaders, not just to act as a protest movement. That brings me to your personal question. I believe, now I'll say something about America, if I may. I believe that while we have our wonder, I think Israel is a man-made Europe, and we have all these flaws and problems. I think that very much the same applies to the American Jewish community. So when I go around this country, being a brother coming from a distant land, I think it gives me a kind of interesting perspective, because I don't take for granted many things that are taken for granted. And I see two things, and I really, I probably can write a PhD now about the American Jewish community. There's so many communities, and I talk to so many people. One, that while we built this miraculous system, American Jews did the miracle of the perfect diaspora. And the achievement of American Jews is astonishing. Because it's not only the personal success of so many Jews, in business and science and law and medicine and arts and whatever. The success of creating a community that is based on voluntary values, that has federations and organizations and foundations and congregations, and is like a universe of its own, a social political universe. And I say, rather than be ashamed of so-called Jewish power or apologetic about it, we should celebrate it and be proud of it. It should be an example to any other minority in this country or elsewhere. Because we, the people, American Jews, also came from nowhere. We are all both people, Israelis and Americans. Because at our history, at a certain point, there was a looming catastrophe. And we had to run for our lives. And some people got on the boat going to the promised land. Other people got on the boat going to the golden. And throughout the years, there was a kind of sibling rivalry, who got on the right boat. But when you see where we are today, you see that both were right. Because we need the sovereignty there, and we need this remarkable diaspora here. And the two are interdependent. There will be no future for us there without you. There will be no future for you here without us. So while this is the great achievement, that is, again, the unsigned success, again, not success and achievement, it's a deep success that should be appreciated and celebrated. I also see the challenge. And you're probably more aware of the challenge than I am, although I see people having difficulty talking about it. And the challenge is the terrible generation gap in your community. As I like to say, roughly speaking, people over 70 have the Holocaust as their context and are religiously committed to Israel and Jewish law. And people over 50 have a strong Jewish identity and remember pre-67 Israel,